Thank you, Anna. This is Nancy Hart, and I think we are going to first verify that everybody can talk, the co-presenters. So, Vinay and Lumadi, are you able to talk?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, great. Thank you. Vinay?
Mm-hmm.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Great.
Oh, great.
Okay. So, welcome. I think we still have some people joining us, but we wanted to make sure that we got started around on the hour. And so we're going to go ahead and get started with the kickoff webinar. As I said, I'm Nancy Hart. I'm a senior program attorney here at the National Council. And before we go further, I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves who is a presenter for the webinar this morning. We'll just go in order of those that are listed on the slide.
Yes, that means I'm next. Hello, everyone. This is Darren Mitchell. I am a consultant to the National Council on this and many other projects, and I've met many of you during the site selection visits. We're so excited to get started with this project. Welcome.
Hey, it's Vinay Dev. I'm a program coordinator with the Asian Pacific Institute on Gender-Based Violence, and I'm so excited to get to know you all.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Lumari Orozco, and I'm a project manager at Casa de Esperanza, the National Latino Network for Healthy Families and Communities. And we're one of the 3 culturally specific training and technical assistance providers on this project. It's great to be here with you all. I'm looking forward to working with each and every one of you.
Sakima?
It looks like Sakima is still trying to get access to be able to speak.
Okay.
Anna's working with her, so hopefully she'll be on in a moment.
Area code 202. Did you find her? Okay.
We're a far-flung group of presenters today.
Right, we come from several different time zones and phone numbers, and there's a lot of you on that, so we're trying to recognize the phone number. Apologies. Oh, sorry, it was 301, sorry.
Hi, this is Sakima again. I feel like I've just gotten the access granted, all backstage pass. So this is Sakima from Howard University School of Social Work. I'm one of 3 of the culturally specific TA providers, and we are excited to be working with you all. My colleague, Dr. Tricia Pringoli, is also in listen-only mode on the webinar.
Great. So that's who we'll be presenting today, and our email addresses are actually listed towards the end of the presentation. If we don't actually get to that slide because it's one of the last slides, it's available in the download of the webinar slides today, and we'll be sending a link. As the introductions indicated, we have several culturally specific TA providers that are partners, but I wanted to just quickly show the broad list of project partners that we have involved in the Firearms Technical Assistance Project. Apart from the Office on Violence Against Women, which of course is our primary partner, and we're in a cooperative agreement with them, we have a number of national TA providers that are discipline specific or discipline specific, and those include Equitas, the Center for Court Innovation, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, the National Center on Protection Orders and Full Faith and Credit, and so on. And then we also have a handful of culturally specific technical assistance providers. So we have a wealth of expertise among all of these that will be brought to the project, and we're really delighted to have such a broad array of partners involved in the project. The sites that have been selected for intensive TA over the next couple of years are Birmingham, Alabama, Brooklyn, New York, Columbus, Ohio, the Muskogee Creek Nation in Oklahoma, Spokane, Washington, and the state of Vermont as a statewide project. We are still in the process of identifying a second tribal site. So in total, there will ultimately be 7 sites that are participating in the project. So as I mentioned, the national TA partners on that first slide, we will be able to draw from personnel from all of those project partner organizations as well as OVW as we work with the sites over the next couple of years. Some of those TA organizations will have representatives on the TA teams that are at the sites, and some will work with the sites on an as-needed basis when their particular expertise is particularly helpful to what's going on. In addition to the national TA partners, the site team is going to have a site TA team, and that is going to be generally a 5-member team comprised of 1 representative from the NCJ, FCJ, and we'll be the lead on those teams. 1 representative from each of the culturally specific TA providers that just introduced themselves, and 1 representative from the other national TA provider organizations based on the expertise that we feel is most helpful to being a regular member of the site TA team. And again, we will be utilizing the expertise of many TA providers. So the site TA team is just the core group that will be focused on that particular site, responsible for ongoing intensive TA. I do also want to note for the tribal sites that the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center will be one of the primary site TA team members. So the reference to the culturally specific TA providers is for the non-tribal sites, and then for the tribal sites, that would be NIWRC, as well as another subject matter TA provider. On the site level, the site management team, as many of you know, is going to be 5 to 12, somewhere in that realm, of representatives in your jurisdiction from key stakeholder agencies, including the lead organization that submitted the proposal and is the lead for the project. And that management team is responsible for the overall project management at your site. In addition to that, as I think many of you know from our site visits or from conversations, the larger collaborative team or larger stakeholder group is a broader community-based group that draws from representatives from many stakeholder agencies and organizations. And we've talked about striving to make that as broad as possible, just to maximize the input from the community on the issues that you're facing as you implement firearms restrictions in domestic violence cases. So that would include community-based organizations, both mainstream and culturally specific, that will participate in the planning and implementation activities to varying degrees. I mean, there will be meetings from time to time of the broader stakeholder group. The site management team will perhaps draw on their expertise as you're doing assessment activities. So it will depend on what you're doing, but that team will be an important part of how you proceed. I'm going to turn it over to Darren to talk a little bit about some timeline issues.
Yes, thank you, Nancy. So I'm going to talk about the broader timeline for the project And after we do this and hear a little bit more from our colleagues with the culturally specific technical assistance providers about their activities in the project, we're going to do a somewhat deeper dive into the planning phase activities with you all, since of course those are most immediate, and I'm sure there are lots of questions about what this project is going to look like over the next couple of months. So this is our initial sort of overview of the overall timeline. And we've divided up the phases of the project, roughly speaking, into a planning phase, an implementation phase, and then as the project draws to a close, we'll be thinking more and more about the development and dissemination of the lessons learned from the project, because of course one of our main objectives is to in addition to enhancing your response to firearms and domestic violence in your own communities, is to draw lessons from both the processes that you were involved in and the outcomes, and share ideas with what works, what didn't work with other communities around the country that are struggling with similar issues. So, planning phase. We've divided that portion into a couple of different segments as well. And the first is where we are right now, which is the pre-project, the activities before the project launch meetings, which we'll talk about in a moment, when we come to you, and we've mentioned this during our site selection visits, and spend a day and a half or so with you to do some intensive planning and development. But before that happens, we here are forming our technical assistant teams, and we'll have announcements about who's on each of the teams soon. This kickoff webinar, of course, is part of the process. You all are working to finalize your site management teams and to expand and solidify your collaborative teams. And as you know from the site selection visits, we already had you pull together folks outside of the management team who brought broad and diverse perspectives to the work, and we were so encouraged by that work, that we know that your collaborative teams moving forward in the project are going to be very robust. We are going to work with you to plan that launch meeting, and part of that, in terms of the substance of the launch meeting, is we'll be involved in some initial assessment work, and we'll talk soon about some tools we've developed to do that assessment work, figure out what's currently happening, what are gaps and challenges, what are areas for further exploration, and potentially to become project focuses as we move forward. We also want to keep in mind that we're hoping to develop some evaluation activities as part of this project. We're hoping that we may have some baseline data at some of the sites. We may have some information about what the current status of efforts are that we can compare to at the end of the project, so we can have some sense of the impact of the work that we're all doing. Finally, during this pre-project launch phase, the culturally specific TA providers are going to be doing some preparatory work, and specifically they're going to be focused on getting together folks and ideas for community listening sessions that will take place after the launch meetings. So they'll be developing questions to ask, interview guides, et cetera, and identifying community-based organizations that do culturally specific work to help facilitate the process of having fruitful community listening sessions, to get a broader perspective on what's happening in the community, especially from the perspective of culturally specific work. The project launch meeting itself is a very exciting activity in projects like this, because it's an opportunity for a broad and diverse group of folks to get together and engage in an effort to figure out what is happening in your community now by mapping it out, mapping out your civil protection order process, mapping out your criminal process, figuring out how people in the community access legal relief and safety through the various portals that they come into the system, and then identifying, what's working and what's not working. And so that's a very important part moving forward in terms of identifying the potential challenges that you all want to work on. As we told you, I think repeatedly during our site assessment visits, our site selection visits, this project is meeting you where you are, and part of that is figuring out where you are and having some common ground amongst folks in the community around what the current system looks like and current processes look like. And we find these activities to be an excellent way for folks to learn from each other about gaps that they don't know about or opportunities to better coordinate or communicate or collaborate that folks haven't yet taken advantage of. So we're excited about doing that work with you all. In addition to that, there's some assessment activities, and as I mentioned earlier, I'll talk about the tools that we've developed to do that work. That will sort of come to a close around the time of the launch meeting as well. So you'll be identifying potential challenges and working together to figure out some at least tentative project objectives and what the next steps will be for your projects. After the launch meeting, there'll be an opportunity to further coalesce around and develop some consensus around what the challenges to be addressed under the project will be. So we will work, the TA team will work intensively with your management team and others in the community to finalize a set of objectives and activities for your particular portion of the project. We'll also spend some time figuring out whether and what sorts of evaluation activities make sense in your communities based on data that you have available to you and ideas that you come up with during this whole planning process. Of course, part of project planning involves assigning responsibilities and deadlines and things like that. So we would work with you as well to figure out who's going to undertake what activities, to what end, and when will that all be done, and build off of that. The culturally specific TA providers will be involved as well on all those activities I just mentioned, but also they'll be working with your management team on the site to develop a list of culturally specific community-based organizations that are recommended for the TA team to engage with in the work on the project. In addition to that, they'll be working with your site management team on logistics and preparation for that second site visit that I mentioned, in which the culturally specific TA providers will engage in community listening sessions. And when that's all done, they'll reconvene and decide on what comes next based on what they learn at each site from both the pre-launch work and this post-launch site visit too. And they'll create a plan for doing the work and a timeline for working during the implementation phase. Please, for those of you who are, I'm sure most of you are familiar with these webinars or Adobe meetings, hopefully you all see a chat box. If any questions arise as we go through this, or comments or observations, please do type them in. We will respond to them. We're also going to make sure to have some time at the end for you to ask specific questions that any of you have. So consider the chat an opportunity to weigh in at any point in this conversation. The planning phase pretty much culminates in an all-sites meeting. So after you all have had an opportunity to work through what you want to do in terms of your initial project objectives, activities, and timelines, we're going to gather together, and each of the sites will send the team to the all-sites meeting. In addition, it will be attended by your technical assistance team members, other of our national partners on the project, and potentially some other experts from communities to the extent that that's relevant to the conversations that will be had at the all-sites meeting. So it's a great opportunity for sharing of what you all came up with during your planning phases, and to begin to identify and discuss and share themes that we've seen across the sites. As you know, you're all, and part of the reason we selected you all is because of the enormous diversity in terms of geography and who the lead agency is and your legal framework and all kinds of other dimensions. We have lots of diversity in this project, which we want to share, but also there are certainly already common themes emerging across your work, and so it's a good opportunity for some networking and cross-fertilization. There'll be training opportunities, so we'll have some experts come in and talk to you about topics that are specifically relevant to the work you're doing, both on the firearms policy development and on the engagement of culturally specific communities and related issues. We may have folks from other communities come in and talk about the work that they're doing. We'll talk about exploration, and we'll be doing some creative thinking about sustainability, which we want to try to build into this project from the beginning. We know from previous work, sort of ongoing engaged work with sites, that once personnel start to leave, once the project ends, there's always the opportunity revert back to the way they were, fall by the wayside, and we're going to do our best to develop and build in sustainability efforts as part of this project.
Darren, can I just interrupt for a second? I just wanted to let folks know that very generally we are thinking that the All Sites meeting would happen sometime in the beginning of next year, February-ish, January through March-ish, and that the launch meetings that Darren was alluding to would be happening this fall, sometime between September and December. And we'll be in touch about scheduling that, but I just wanted people to have a general time frame.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Once the planning period is over, after the All Sites meeting, you all are going to start your work. You're going to start implementing what you've come up with as your project activities leading towards your objectives. And so just in terms of the work that the technical assistance teams will be engaged in with you, we're certainly going to be involved in regular check-ins. At this point, we're planning on holding at least monthly check-ins between the technical assistance team and your sites management team and others who are relevant to the particular conversations. The culturally specific TA providers are going to be heavily engaged in their community assessment, language access, and organizational assessment activities around cultural responsiveness, which you're going to hear more about in just a couple of minutes. And we are planning to come out to you all as appropriate, as deemed appropriate by you all and us, to engage in many different activities. We can facilitate meetings, especially on particularly difficult challenges that you're facing. Sometimes, as you know, having sort of an outsider come in that facilitates those conversations can be very helpful. We'll be doing training. We'll be connecting you with professionals from other communities who can provide assistance and advice, et cetera, et cetera. And we're thinking, 2 or 3 times a year, probably on average, we would head out with some group of folks to help you on site. There's also potentially an opportunity for travel, part of your team to travel to another community, a mentor community. And we're calling them mentor communities. These are places that have developed and implemented different processes and strategies that may be translatable to the work that you're doing, so you can go and see how they're doing it. These are what we consider to be good practices to look at, and that we think it will be valuable to you all. We, in addition, will be talking about evaluation activities all along, as we mentioned. We intend to have some training and networking and other opportunities as we move through the project on kind of an ad hoc basis. So we may present webinars as issues arise. Maybe there'll be some common issues. We'll convene webinars or conversations amongst the sites, and there may be opportunity also to travel to each other's sites as part of this project as well. We do plan to do a second All Sites meeting in the second year of the project as well, to keep the networking and interaction going. So, and then as we move forward, there may be opportunities for us, as we're learning things, to do webinars as your implementation is going on, where we've learned something or identified a process or strategy that seems to work well, to share it with the broader world. And that may be an opportunity for us and you all on the site teams to participate in getting the word out to folks all around the country. And then in addition to that, we're going to be working with you all on sustainability, as I mentioned earlier. So I'm going to turn it over first now. We're going to have the culturally specific technical assistance providers talk in a little bit more depth about the work that they will be engaged in over the course of the implementation phase. And I'm going to begin by turning it over to my colleague, Lumadi Orozco, to talk about her organization's organizational assessment work.
Thank you, Darren. Greatly appreciate that. And before I get started, I just wanted to extend a congratulations to all of the sites for being selected for this project. I didn't get a chance to do that earlier, and we're certainly very excited to work with you on this project. So as Darren mentioned, the culturally specific TA providers have very specific deliverables that we will be engaging in, or activities that we'll be engaging with each of the sites. But over the in addition to that, not only are we going to be working on the very specific activities that we're all will be sharing with you here in a few minutes, we're also going to be working on general issues of cultural responsiveness, community engagement, and access to services for victims from racially and ethnically diverse communities. And so to start, I'll talk a little bit about the activity, one of the activities that the domestic violence service providers at each of the sites will be engaging with me on. We'll be engaging in an organizational assessment process, specifically for the domestic violence service providers at each of the sites. And the way that this process will roll out, essentially we will convene a meeting. I will convene a meeting with leadership and management from the domestic violence service provider, basically to provide an overview of what the organizational assessment entails, what that process will be, how long we can expect to be engaged in that process. After that information has been shared and any questions answered for the DV service provider leadership and management, we'll decide on a date to distribute the organizational assessment tool itself by way of a SurveyMonkey. And the expectation is that once that survey is disseminated to you all, that you would share that with all of your staff at your organization. We'd like to be able to engage as many staff members, volunteers, board members, interns at your organization to help us get a very thorough participation level, and also to be able to gain as many varying perspectives as possible. The organizational assessment tool itself is a tool that assesses levels of cultural responsiveness within an organization. In this case, as it pertains to providing services to Latina victim survivors of domestic violence. So what the assessment is really looking at is helping individuals within an organization to self-identify where they feel the organization stands in their level of cultural responsiveness. We'll look at 7 different categories, looking at language access, looking at how you're engaging with community, looking at whether or not your policies are reflective of the needs of communities of color, or in this case, Latino communities. So we'll be looking at a lot of different components there. The assessment itself is about 72 questions. And in addition to the OAT, on the side of that parallel work that I'll be undertaking with the OAT, we're also involved holding a few listening sessions with Latina victim survivors who have engaged in services with the domestic violence service provider, and also conducting some one-on-one interviews with culturally specific community-based key stakeholders. So looking at any Latino serving programs in community to kind of assess what their experiences have been engaging with the domestic violence service provider, what they've heard, what their experiences themselves have been. Again, just to help us get a really comprehensive picture of what service provision, domestic violence service provision, and access to services really looks like for Latina victim survivors in that particular jurisdiction, or in the case of Vermont, within the state of Vermont. So once we've done some of that work, we've distributed and collected all of the data from the SurveyMonkey, I'll put a report together. It's basically what will be included in that report will be the tallying or the information gleaned from the OAT. That information is being reported back to the domestic violence service provider, will be very concrete, and then it's simply reporting numbers that staff reported. There's no interpretations of the numbers. There's no values assigned to the numbers. It's basically saying, for example, that in one particular category, 35 out of 40 staff felt that the organization falls at this end of the spectrum or this other end of the spectrum. And so what we'll do is I'll convene a meeting to kind of to share those results, have any conversations around the results, opportunities for you for the domestic violence service providers to ask any questions as it relates to the OAT itself and the results. And then what we'll do is we'll work together. And this step here, this in-person meeting, is something that I've been doing for some time, but we can figure out if it's something that works for each of the organizations involved or how it might look different for each of the domestic violence service providers, as well as the state of Vermont. Typically what we'll do is once I've shared the results and had conversations with leadership and management, we'll bring that information to your staff. So in a half-day meeting, in-person meeting, we'll share the details of what the results of the OAT were, and then we'll spend some time in helping in identifying what the 2 to 3 top priorities are for each domestic violence provider as identified by staff in the OAT. Once we've identified those 2 to 3 priorities, we'll spend some time having staff break off into small groups to help address each one of those priorities. And what we're looking at here is looking at what steps an organization can take to address that issue, who needs to be involved in that process, what resources are needed to do that, what types of training and capacity building opportunities are needed to get the organization to address that particular priority. After that happens, what we'll do is we'll take all of that information and I will work with each one of the domestic violence service providers to schedule and deliver a 1 to 2 day OAT Training Institute. And the Training Institute typically involves providing training that was identified, or capacity building opportunities that were identified by way of the OAT as being priority to the organization. So if the organization, for example, has needs around engaging Latino communities, then one of the trainings that will be provided would be, for example, on how do you engage Latino communities in this work, or how do you provide Latina-based advocacy to Latina victims of domestic violence. And so that will culminate some of that. That'll be the most intensive part of the work, will be the build-up to the OAT Training Institute, and then of course engaging with you all on providing culturally specific and culturally relevant training and technical assistance as you identify as domestic violence service providers that you feel would be beneficial to your organization in terms of providing services to Latina victims of domestic violence, enhancing services, or just increasing access to services for Latina victim survivors in your jurisdiction. And so in a nutshell, that's what the organizational assessment process will entail. I will pass it off to my colleague, Bené, to talk about her language access activities. Bené?
Is Bené on?
Is Bené
on? Are you, Bené?
So how about we pass it over to Sakima to talk about community engagement, and maybe come back to Bené. I will try to get a hold of her.
Hello?
Or comment. Oh, there she is. Okay, there you go.
Oh, that was odd.
Yeah, so
hi,
you want to go back.
Bené.
Go ahead.
Sorry about that. Hi, this is Bené. Thank you, Lumari, for that introduction. Sorry, I was having tech difficulties. And so, again, I'm from the Asian Pacific Institute on Gender-Based Violence. And the focus of our deliverables and activities is on language access. And so I'll just run through briefly what the plan is and how that process will go, and so you know what to look for. And so initially, we will be conducting an initial language access assessment and collect any and all current language access plans that exist with the management team agencies. And so we'll be working with both domestic violence service providers, but also law enforcement, and any other agencies that have, language access plans or need language access work. Once the initial assessment is done, simultaneously we'll also be identifying culturally specific partners who may be interested in or able to serve as local beacon organizations. And so this is actually an intentional point that we make while we're doing this work, it's a way of building in long-term sustainability, of building connections with local communities. I think it's important to us to lift local resources, local culturally specific CBOs who exist in and are doing the work in the communities. Yeah, sure, we are a national resource. We are here to provide PA and training, specifically in regards to Asian and Pacific Islander communities. But at the end of the day, you know best the needs of your communities, and so it's important to us to partner all the sites with local agencies who are working with these communities on the ground. So hand in hand, we will be working to build their capacity to be a resource to you. And so, again, so it's a long-term sustainability. So while we are simultaneously identifying those folks, we will look back at what surfaced in the initial assessment with the management and site team. And so we will look at that and then review any existing language access plans that have been given to us by each of the sites. And once those are reviewed, we'll meet with the management team to conduct more in-depth assessment of language access protocols and practices and identify additional capacity building needs. Excuse me, sorry. Once all those assessments have been done, we would then sit down and create the actual implementation plan. So part of that plan would be building out, how we would work with the sites to either, if they have a plan, we would work to revise that, review it, see what's working, what TA needs to be done, what needs to be built into it, and if language access plans aren't currently in existence, we would work with the site to create a brand new policy and protocol. Go ahead to the next slide. Thank you. And so, yeah, we would develop and or revise language access plans. And if at this point those beacon organizations have been identified, we would work with them to conduct any needed capacity building or training or technical assistance. And so then the goal would be if, we have those local CBOs, we would work with them to roll out the plans, roll out trainings. So the next step would be conducting language access foundational trainings or train the trainers. Our goal is to build the capacity of the sites and make sure you are fully equipped, have all the tools, have all the knowledge, and that your capacity is built. So when we have staff transitions or turnover, you are able to, you have a solid foundation and understanding of why language access is important, why plans exist, why protocols exist, and are able to do a training or onboard new staff or new folks that are coming on because you have that foundation. So we would do the train the trainer, and this would potentially be in partnership with that beacon organization. And after the train the trainer is done, we would also schedule and plan rollout of additional trainings, possibly again in partnership with the beacon organization. And something to keep in mind is that language access and language access plans are a living document. It's sure there's a point we want to reach where we have a good plan in place, a good protocol in place, that we are providing equitable and access to the communities that need services. But that doesn't mean once a plan is written and done, reviewed, and passed, that it's a one and done deal. So plans are always changing. The community is changing. We come across folks are coming to you that are seeking services that need maybe services in a language, or there's something that comes up that we haven't thought of initially. So it's always important to remember that your language access plan is always open to be adapted. Things are added to and editing and updates. And so, again, just kind of having that fluidness and flexibility in mind. And again, in addition to all the language access work, we are also here as a resource to provide general TA and training around cultural responsiveness, as Lumari mentioned, working with communities of color, but particularly with Asian and Pacific Islander communities as well, which, I mean, as you know, is an extremely diverse and vast group of identities and cultures. And so, again, part of our work is, we provide any TA training you need with that, but also our goal would be to find you local beacon organizations that serve, Asian and Pacific Islander communities within your cities or counties or state. So you have a local resource always to go to who actually know what's happening on the ground, what are the needs of the people seeking services, and building those strong community connections and relationships, and that's kind of our goal with that. And I think that's it for me. And so now I will pass it on to Sakima.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Benet and Lumari. You guys provided an excellent overview. We at Howard University are going to be working on the community engagement activities. And before I go any further, I just want everyone to exhale because I know that this is a lot and it seems like we are moving very quickly. So I want to just give you a little bit of assurance that these timelines are going to happen over years. So you don't have to think that everything we're doing, you have to cram it into the first year. This timeline is an expansive timeline, and everything will roll out as it should. You are the experts. You in your communities, in your local townships, in your cities, you really know what's best. We are going to be committed to your communities, and we want to hear from you. So we begin our implementation with a community needs assessment, and we start with you. We start with the site team. We begin by first talking with you, having conversations. Then we do an online SurveyMonkey, and we're going to identify the needs. We want to get data from the site team. We want to get data from local culturally specific community-based organizations. We want to get data from local key stakeholders. We want to get just local data that pertains to domestic violence and firearms. So we will move on from there, and then we really do begin to start getting into the community. You heard Darren talk about us being there for the first site team meeting, and then the CS-TAPs kind of being there and starting to do interviews and focus site groups. And that's one of the things that we do in particular. We start to conduct interviews, we do focus groups, we do asset mapping. And we're not just going to land in your city and say, hey, we're here, we're going to do some things. We really do want to include you. We're going to include you in what we're doing each step, but just so you know, we are committed to community. And the community, just like each of my colleagues has had a specific lens, ours is Black and African American community. We are going to conduct phone and virtual meetings with the site team, and we're going to review some of what has come up for us from key stakeholders, from those focus group conversations, from some community group conversations, and then from those things we're going to create what we call the Community Engagement Action Plan. It's a rather extensive plan, and a lot goes into it. So by the time we put all of the data into that action plan and all of those, the information that we've actually talked to people. We've gone into community centers. We've gone into churches sometimes, other faith-based organizations. We really want to get a feel for what's going on. What are survivors saying? Where are the checks and balances? Where are people going for services? Who are they calling for services? And then who's coming through the doors and also who's not. So we're going to really look at all of that information and do that community engagement action plan. Once we've done that, we'll be working closely with our OVW reps, and anytime we do something, we submit it for OVW approval. From there, once we have the approval, we'll begin to conduct trainings and technical assistance per the CE action plan, and we're really looking to build capacity. So we're going to be working on cultural responsiveness, cultural humility. We're going to be working a lot on integration, a lot on accountability, and from everyone's lens. So we don't just work with the DV service provider, we're also working with law enforcement, We're also working in the courts where allowable, and whomever, whether it's Nancy or Darren. I know as we progress through the project, there's going to be some conversation about which of the CS taps are needed at which particular sites, and you all have some say about that also. So you can make requests based on, the needs of your community. And then at the outset, we're going to engage in ongoing training and technical assistance. We're just as willing and able to do both training, where we would come in and do, standardized training, but we're also willing to do technical assistance and really prefer to help you through that so that the project is sustainable and you're able to, just like Bené said, you're able to carry on all of the wonderful work that we do even once we are ready to move on from the project. That's the end goal, that we leave communities better than what we found them, because we are indeed committed to communities. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Lumadi, Bené, and Sakima, for your overview of the work you're going to do. And again, if folks have any questions, please do chat in, and we'll open it up at the end as well. So if you have any questions for any of the three of them or for us, this is part of the opportunity we wanted to provide for you today. So I'm going to finish off the timeline before we go into a little more detail around these initial couple of months of the project, 2 or 3 months of the project. As Sakima pointed out, that's a lot of work we just talked about, and it will take place over an extended period of time. And as we get towards the end of our period working together, we're going to start to engage in activities around disseminating the lessons that we learned from the project. And from previous experience that many of us on the national partner team and the TA teams have had with projects like this, we know that that's going to involve disseminating strategies that you've developed, forms and written protocols, memoranda of understanding, and other collaborative tools that will include those in training that we and our partners do nationally. We'll figure out ways to package and disseminate them for folks through our TA efforts and the TA efforts of our partners. We may develop some videos or other resources to help people understand what you all attempted and accomplished in this project. We would invite you to join us for webinars, for in-person trainings, and for other opportunities to spread the word and share your experience about the work, both substantively what you did, but also in part what we want to share is the process, what it was like for you as a community in a multidisciplinary, inclusive way to try to figure out ways to do a better job around guns and domestic violence. So sharing those stories with other communities can be a particularly rich experience for others. And in addition to that, we're going to, of course, because of all the hard work that the culture-specific TA providers are going to be engaged in, we want to include what they've identified as promising or best practices for including culturally responsive training and technical assistance into a project like this, how to develop meaningful, diverse, engaged collaborations, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what we have to look forward to towards the end of the project, when you're all in a position to share all the wonderful things that you've done. Our general timeline, and Nancy mentioned this a little bit earlier, is as follows. We are now engaged in our planning phase, really with this kickoff webinar, and as you all start to work on your developing your teams on the site, and also engaging with the assessment tool. And that's probably going to go beyond the fall of 2019 into early next year, around the time of the all-site meeting, which, as Nancy said, is tentatively set for February-ish, anywhere from January to March, depending on where the sites are and what works for everyone. But that's where we're going to convene the all-sites meeting, and then we're going to head into the implementation phase of this project, which at this point we are hopeful is going to be through 2021. We'll see what funding looks like, and for us and what your ability to continue the project is, but that's the plan for now, to at least carry on through 2021 with the project.
Great, thank you, Darren.
Nancy, sorry.
Yeah. So just wanted to spend a little bit more time reviewing these initial planning phase activities, and that's what most of the remainder of our time will be, is just to make sure that we go through some of the details involved in these things. And this first slide talks about all of the pre-launch activities, the formation of the technical assistance team, the kickoff webinar that we're having right now, finalization of the management team, expansion of the collaborative team, planning the launch meeting, and then initial site assessment work. So we are in the process of creating the site TA teams for each site based on the particular challenges that we've noticed or you've described, and we should have TA teams identified, within the next week or 10 days, something like that. And then, of course, we have today's webinar, which is being recorded because we know that there's a number of management team members that weren't able to do it at this particular time. So we will be sending a link to that, and you'll get the materials as well. And we've discussed this too with some of the site coordinators, the finalization of the site management team. Some of you are in the process of doing this already or may have already finalized your site management team. But over the next few weeks, we want to make sure that each of your management teams is in place, and we will be able to, we can help with that. Ideally, there will be 5 to 12 representatives from the key disciplines. 12 is probably a fairly large management team, but it's up to you to decide who you feel is critical to moving the work forward in your community. The logistics get a little crazy the larger it gets, because we will be planning at least a monthly regular phone call with the site TA team members and the management team members. But again, we leave that to you to decide who the critical allies are for your management team. And as we've done throughout the site visits and conversations, we strongly encourage you to include community-based organizations and culturally specific organizations in particular on your management team. Recognizing that you may have to select among several possibilities, and you may not be able to have all of them on the management team. The expansion.
Can I just quickly, Nancy? Sorry.
Go ahead.
In terms of the formation of both the management team that Nancy just discussed and the collaborative team, which she's about to discuss, please do reach out to us if you have any questions, want any advice, input in that process. Nancy, I, and the culturally specific technical assistance providers are all available to help you with that process. Yeah.
And some of you have already made some inquiries, and we're as I say, you're in the process of doing this. But with the larger, broader collaborative group, that's a group that can have people that might not be as at the table for the management team, but still reaching as far as you can into the community to get all of the stakeholder disciplines represented, and community-based organizations from different culturally specific organizations, judicial officers, court administrators, the different law enforcement agencies. So you may have many law enforcement agencies in your jurisdiction, representatives from as many as possible, including probation and parole, or court supervision, victim advocates, both system-based and community-based, culturally specific organizations, as I've mentioned, civil attorneys, criminal defense attorneys, and then federal professionals as they are available and needed. But those are particularly helpful in the larger picture, as even if your jurisdiction is not going to be working directly on, we definitely want to have as many federal agencies involved in the larger group as possible. So just to amplify further on that, some other groups that some of you have already put on your teams or actually were leaders in your proposals, faith leaders, public health department personnel, mental health professionals, individuals engaged in your community in anti-violence work, and sometimes elected officials or their staff. These are all places to consider looking for allies that will help promote the work as you move through, not only designing a protocol but getting it implemented, or all of the places where it might help promote the work. So Darren will describe briefly the site assessment work in just a few minutes, but we do have some tools that we've shared with the site coordinators, but eventually all of the members of the management team will see these tools that we've developed in consultation with culturally specific TA providers that will help you and the management team members work together to complete an initial assessment of your strengths, challenges, and potential areas for improvement. These are tools that you may need to ask others in your community in order to complete them. So the idea is that the management team will work together to figure out who it is that might have the information that will help you fill those out and complete they're not really questionnaires, but Darren will go over that in just a minute. And that work is something that we're hoping that you'll be doing between now and the middle of July, maybe towards the end of July, some time frame like that. And then finally, we're going to be commencing the planning of these launch meetings, which again will hopefully be between September and December. The TA team will be working with your site management team. It's going to be a 1.5-day launch meeting at each site. One of those days will be with the larger collaborative group. So as far as planning ahead, it would be a full, the better part of a day for the larger stakeholder group. And the second half day is more likely to just involve the management team. So the management team would need to set aside a day and a half, but the larger collaborative group would probably be finished in less than a day. And the TA team members will be coming to that along with any other national TA partners that we think would be helpful to your particular launch discussion. And as Darren mentioned earlier, the key activities for that on-site launch meeting are the mapping process that would involve the larger collaborative group, and then a review of some of the assessment tools, a review of the assessment activities that you will already have completed, but continued assessment of that in order to come to some consensus around some goals and objectives for the project, and identifying next steps in that as well.
Okay, I'm going to talk with you a little bit about these site assessment tools that we've mentioned a few times now. It's our opportunity to think a little bit about what they are and how they can be used to help you all better understand your existing system and existing response to firearms in domestic violence cases, both civil protection order cases and criminal cases, and how they can be used to start to identify potential focus areas for your FTAP project. So the initial site assessment work that's going to happen in advance of the launch meeting involves these assessment tools, and the idea is to use them to figure out your strengths, your challenges, and your potential areas for improvement. We suggest that the site management teams, that you all take a look at these tools, kind of get a sense of what they are asking you to do, the focus areas and the kinds of information that they suggest you gather, so you can have come up with a plan for how best to do the assessment using those particular tools, and In some instances, I know that management teams are going to sit down together and work their way through parts of it. In others, they're going to figure out who the best people to approach to get the information to complete the tool would be. But in any event, these are designed to be part of a collaborative process involving communication with the folks who are doing the work to understand what's happening now in your community and what may not be happening, but maybe things that you want to consider putting into place. So we certainly do encourage you to expand the group that you work with in completing these assessment tools to include collaborative team members as appropriate and as they are available to help you all. And we've already had a couple of initial conversations with project coordinators around that who all seem to have a good sense of how to move forward in their own communities. And in fact, a little bit of conversation around customizing the tools to some degree to make them more readily accessible to people and to broaden the net that you're casting in terms of getting the information. So these assessment tools are divided into 5 individual focus areas. You won't be surprised that one of them is around the civil protection order system and another is around your criminal domestic violence system, where there's an arrest and a criminal prosecution moving forward. But in addition to that, we've also developed tools around some of our, those of you who we interacted with during our site selection visits know, we talk about some of the underpinnings of this work, including strong collaboration, a focus on an elevation of victim autonomy to the extent possible, and ensuring that respondents' due process and other rights are assured in any intervention or strategy that you implement. And so we have assessment tools around those areas as well as the 2 principal systems that you will be focusing on for your work. To give you a sense of what the tool looks like, we have a copy of we have a page, a capture, which is not working for me. Oh, there we go. We have kind of a page capture of the civil protection order system's first area. And so let me use this as an opportunity to help you understand what these tools look like. Essentially, the column on the left, and some of these are quite voluminous. There are a couple of them are several pages, and in fact, the civil protection order system is divided up into a set of sort of steps or parts of the system that you would be assessing on an individual basis. And that left column lays out some practices that we suggest that, and have found in some communities to be very useful in terms of getting information about folks' access to guns or taking steps to inform people about their rights, their ability to get help from the court or from others around guns, or of course to take steps to actually get guns out of the hands of abusers. So the left column is really a set of practices and the idea is that you ask the right folks in your community about whether these practices are in place, whether folks are doing this stuff. And the right column, which has those checkboxes to indicate whether things are happening currently, or you're working on it, or it's there and you think it needs improvement, you don't know, you need more information, or you don't think it's applicable to you all, and of course you can customize this. In addition to noting that, this is an area where you can take notes around some specifics around that part of the process that you want to note moving forward. Maybe you've identified something in particular about that you think it would be particularly helpful for your community. You want to note that. There may be some nuance around it that you want to indicate. So that right-hand column is really about your note-taking and your ability to capture ideas as you move through this assessment process that will feed into the mapping exercises and the other work that we do to identify project focuses and activities. So you can see here for information gathering, we think it's really important for advocates to ask questions about guns, the access and possession by abusers during their confidential conversations with survivors, and for them to use guides or questionnaires in that process. So we ask, is that happening, et cetera, down the line. So you can almost look at that leftmost column in all of these tools as a set of practices that we think all communities should at least consider engaging in. So the idea is that, led by the management team and the project coordinator, your sites will gather information about what's happening in your sites and which of these areas you think need improvement or you would want to move forward with as focus areas for your project. These are not scored by us or anyone else. They are purely information gathering tools for you all and for us working in conjunction with you to shape your project. And so use them in a way that makes the most sense for you, your community, your colleagues. If you have any questions about them, if you have questions about what some of the practices mean or how they may be applicable to you all, please do reach out to us because we really want to make this a process that is a great learning experience for you all. And if part of the tool just doesn't work for you, you think it's not relevant or you would do it a different way, by all means, please, this is also an opportunity just to spur some conversation and thought on your part. So as is generally true of us in our approach to this project, we're meeting you where you are, and we're trying to be helpful, but not dictate an approach and not expect that you're going to do things in a very particular way. So again, the bottom line on this is please use the tools as an opportunity to engage in some deep thinking around these issues to the extent you have the time and ability to do so with the right people, with as many different people as you can, and use it as an opportunity to gather some information that then as we head into the your launch meetings where the mapping is done and the further assessment work is done, this can feed into that process and may even enable you to flag some particular topics of conversation for those particular discussions in a multidisciplinary group. We told the project coordinators that we would love for you all to use these tools over the next month and a half or so, maybe 2 months, working with your colleagues. And we're hoping that we would have, that you'll be done with it and have some good information to feed into the site, the launch meetings by mid to late July. And the indication was that that should work for you all, and you know, we'll do whatever we can to help facilitate that. But the goal is to be able to have this information in time that it can be incorporated successfully into the launch events. Again, if you have any questions about any of this, it's probably the first time some of you have seen it. We would be very happy to answer those. This is just a screen capture of 3 parts of a multi-dimension tool, which is part of a big set of tools. So there's a lot of these kinds of practices and processes that we're asking you to think about as part of this assessment work. So I think having said that, I'm going to turn it back over to Nancy.
Thank you, Darren. And really, we haven't had a lot of questions, but maybe that's maybe it's just because everything has been pretty clear. So we hope that's true. But if you have questions now or after you get off the webinar, really we welcome all of questions, even if you feel like something has already been gone over with some other member of your management team. And again, at the end of the presentation, you'll see our email addresses. I'm going to, so I will put those up when we're finished. But just to wrap up for today, the next steps, the most immediate next steps are that the TA team is going to be reaching out to you regarding finalization of your site management team and expansion of the collaborative team. Some of that has already started, but we'll be continuing to work with you. And again, as Darren said, ask us questions if you have any thoughts about someone, whether you should or should not reach out to a particular person, or if you want some ideas about who to reach out to for the larger collaborative group. We absolutely welcome that. Then we will also be working with you to, over the next couple of weeks, to plan a schedule for regular telephone calls between the management team and the TA team, the site TA team. And then we'll be working with you also, hopefully in the next few weeks, to schedule the launch meeting in your jurisdiction. And we know that it's it's hard to pin things down, but we're hoping that if we can plan, the first one's not until September. We still have several months to identify a date that works for everybody or works for most people. I'm going to go ahead and put up our contact information for, I see there's a question from Sean about the official announcement about the site selection, and we have approved language from OVW for the site announcement, and we're in the process of, it needs to, I think it's in the finalization stage, so we're anticipating that it will get out this week. I see Darren's already responded to that. So if there isn't any other questions posed, we are probably at the end of our presentation. All we have is the fact that we're with our grant number, but I'll put it back to our contact information. I see someone typing a question, so we'll wait a couple more minutes. Okay, so I think we're ready to close. It doesn't sound like there's any questions, and you have our contact information if something comes up after the fact.
Do any of our partners have anything that they would like to add before we go?
So thank you, everyone, for making time to...
Nancy, it looks like Alicia Nichols is trying to type something.
Yeah, I see that.
Question. Several folks are trying to type in.
Right. Oh, and Alicia, yes, thank you, Alicia. Alicia is the new Deputy Director for the National Resource Center on Firearms and Domestic Violence. I think I have your title right. So she is offering assistance. And they are, of course, one of our project partners, so they'll be very involved. Huh? Is someone typing a few thank yous? All right. It looks like we are in the thank you zone, but thank you, really, everybody, for making time to listen in.